The white dress hugged every soft curve of Lila, accentuating the regal beauty of the bride-to-be. Under the gentle golden lights of the five-star hotel, she radiated like a precious gem among her closest friends. Crisp laughter echoed throughout the luxurious space, blending with the lively background music, creating an atmosphere that was vibrant, joyful, and full of life. Her friends surrounded her, continuously raising their glasses in celebration. Everyone rejoiced for Lila's upcoming big day. She smiled brightly, her eyes shimmering with happiness. In just a few more days, she would officially become the wife of David, the man she loved with all her heart. All she wished for was a happy future, a home filled with love. But amidst the cheerful atmosphere, one person did not share in the collective joy. From a secluded corner of the room, Jessica watched silently, gripping her wine glass tightly. Her eyes remained fixed on Lila with a complex gaze, a bitterness no one could perceive. No one knew that, behind the mask of a close friend, Jessica was hiding a painful secret. She loved David. This feeling wasn't something new. Jessica had loved David for a long time, even before he met Lila. She had once believed that one day he would realize her feelings, that they were meant to be together. But everything crumbled when David chose Lila. Why her? As the wedding day drew nearer, Jessica's jealousy and resentment grew stronger. Lila had everything: David's love, his attention, a future filled with happiness, and she had nothing. That thought made Jessica unable to accept reality. She couldn't let this wedding happen. Tonight, Jessica had a plan, a perfect plan to destroy everything. She raised her wine glass, her lips curling into a warm smile, but deep within her eyes lay an unreadable chill. "Drink up, Lila. This is your last night as a single woman," she cheered, her voice as joyful as any good friend sharing in the bride's excitement. Lila laughed, unsuspecting. She lifted her vibrant cocktail, gently clinking glasses with Jessica. "You're right, I have to enjoy it." She took a sip, feeling the cool liquids sweep over her tongue, the sweet fruit flavors mixed with a strong hint of alcohol, making her feel a bit more relaxed. Lila was never a strong drinker, but tonight was special. What harm was there in indulging a little? 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3. The music played on. The lights twinkled. Laughter filled the air. Friends surrounded her, toasting endlessly, their voices ringing with cheerful shouts of, "Congratulations!" Lila laughed more, her body feeling warm, her mind hazy. The world around her seemed to spin, blurring at the edges. Jessica watched quietly, the corner of her lips curling slightly as she observed Lila's reactions. She was losing control. Jessica pretended to pour more wine into her glass, but in truth she barely drank. She needed to stay sharp to execute her plan. Lila blinked, gripping the table lightly to steady herself. "Wow, I think I drank too much," she murmured, her voice slightly drawn out. Jessica placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle yet firm. "You're drunk. Let me take you to your room to rest." Lila shook her head, trying to protest, but her body had gone weak, completely drained of strength. She didn't realize that, step by step, drink by drink, she was being led into a trap by Jessica. A plan so meticulously crafted that when she woke up, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Jessica guided Lila down the hotel hallway, each step calculated with cold precision. Lila, completely unaware, was walking straight into a setup. The room Jessica had prepared was only a few steps away. She had rented a suite in this very hotel and left the door slightly ajar to ensure there would be no delays. The man she had arranged was waiting inside. All it would take was a simple push. Shove Lila inside, close the door, and the wedding would be over before the night was through. Everything seemed perfect. But then Jessica made a fatal mistake. In her haste, she didn't notice that another room nearby also had its door open. Just as she was about to push Lila into the designated room, she miscalculated and led her toward the wrong one. Lila, in her drunken haze, felt a vague sense of resistance. She mumbled, I can walk. Where's my room?" Before Jessica could correct the mistake, Lila stepped into the open doorway right in front of her. But it wasn't the room Jessica had arranged. It was Adrian's room. Jessica froze, her eyes widening. She had made a mistake. The room she had rented was just a few feet away, also open, but in the rush, she had lost her bearings and pushed Lila into the wrong place. Panic surged in Jessica's chest as the door slowly swung shut behind Lila. She wanted to run, to pull Lila back, but if she did, her entire plan would be exposed. Jessica stood paralyzed in the hallway, realizing that everything was now spiraling out of her control. She could do nothing, and the worst part was, all of their fates had been changed forever because of one small mistake. Inside the high-end hotel suite, soft golden light bathed the space, reflecting off the polished ebony table at the center of the room. Everything in this suite exuded luxury, from the abstract paintings on the walls to the premium leather armchair in which Adrian sat. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the top buttons undone, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. One hand held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling slightly with each subtle movement of his wrist. In the stillness of the room, the faint clink of ice against the glass was the only sound. Adrian didn't care for noisy crowds. Outside, the party's music still thumped faintly through the walls, but he had chosen solitude instead, savoring a rare moment of peace. As a young and successful businessman, he was no stranger to extravagant galas, insincere socializing, and handshakes full of ulterior motives. But tonight, he wasn't in the mood for any of it. Leaning back in his chair, he gazed out through the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the city lights stretched endlessly like a living, breathing painting. Sometimes he wondered, after all the achievements, the endless meetings, what truly mattered. Then a faint noise interrupted his thoughts. The door creaked open. Adrian frowned slightly, setting his glass down on the table. He didn't recall inviting anyone. The door pushed open further and a woman stepped in, a complete stranger. Lila stumbled into the room, her steps unsteady, her body swaying slightly from intoxication. The white dress clung to her curves, highlighting her regal elegance, while also making her appear more fragile than ever. Her cheeks were flushed, though whether from the alcohol or the warmth in her body, Adrian couldn't tell. Her eyes shimmered, unfocused, as if she wasn't fully registering her surroundings. Adrian's brows furrowed. Who was she? He was about to speak, to tell her she had entered the wrong room, when she suddenly lifted her gaze to his. For a moment there was a flicker of confusion in her drunken eyes, then a soft smile spread across her lips. "David," Layla whispered, her voice as tender as a lover's call. Adrian stiffened. David? Who the hell was David? He opened his mouth to correct her, but before he could react, she moved closer. Slowly, almost dreamlike, her hands slid up around his neck, her breath laced with the scent of alcohol and a faint trace of sweet perfume. Adrian tensed, muscles coiling at the unexpected closeness. "Stay with me tonight, please," she murmured, her voice dazed but carrying an irresistible allure. Adrian felt his breath hitch slightly. She truly thought he was someone else. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind in an instant. He could push her away. He could call hotel security, could do anything to put an end to this bizarre encounter. But then, something in him stopped him from doing so. Not because of the alcohol, but because of the way she looked at him, lost, vulnerable, yet full of an aching desire, as if she were searching for safety, for a place to belong. Adrian had no idea who she was, no idea what kind of story had led her to this moment, but in that instant, he found himself being pulled into her world. What he didn't know was that this one mistaken encounter would change his life forever. Welcome to Soul Stories. Bukal. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. The morning sunlight filtered through the thick curtains, casting a soft golden glow across the hotel room. A gentle light that, despite its warmth, mercilessly exposed a harsh reality. Lila stirred slightly, her body feeling heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. A dull ache ran down her spine, radiating through her muscles with each movement. Her head throbbed painfully, as if 1,000 needles were piercing through her skull, each cell screaming from the after effects of alcohol. Slowly, she opened her eyes, her eyelashes fluttering as consciousness returned to her. And then, the sight before her made her heart pound violently. A stranger was lying beside her. He was fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady, his broad, muscular chest rising and falling rhythmically under the morning light. His strong arm rested close to her, his bare torso barely concealed by the white sheets. A tidal wave of shock crashed over her, sweeping away all rational thought. Lila shot up as if she had been electrocuted, but a wave of dizziness struck her instantly, making her stumble backward. The white sheets slipped off her body, exposing her bare skin, and in that instant, pure horror set in. No, this can't be happening. Panic surged through her veins as she frantically grabbed the sheets, wrapping them tightly around herself. Her breathing turned ragged, her chest constricting, as if there wasn't enough air in the room. What had she done? Who was this man? Lila clutched her head, her mind screaming, desperately trying to piece together the fragments of last night. She remembered, drinking too much. Jessica leading her out of the party, stumbling through the hotel hallway, but after that, everything was a blur. She couldn't remember a single thing beyond that point, but one thing was painfully clear. The man lying next to her was not David. How could this have happened? Her heartbeat pounded so violently that she could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, drowning her in a paralyzing panic. And then, the man beside her stirred. Adrian's dark eyes flickered open, locking onto Lila's terrified gaze. A brief flicker of confusion crossed his face, but it disappeared almost instantly, replaced by a composed calmness. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep, deep yet cautious. Lila shook her head repeatedly, her eyes wide with shock, her breath coming in short gasps. No, this can't be. She couldn't bring herself to say the words. Adrian sat up, watching her carefully, his expression unreadable, but laced with quiet understanding. Her face said everything. She had no idea what had happened. He realized it immediately. "Calm down," Adrian spoke again, his voice steady, trying to anchor her from spiraling further into panic. But that only made her more terrified. She stared at him as if he were an unbearable nightmare. Who are you?" she gasped, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. Adrian exhaled slowly, as if preparing for this. "I'm Adrian," he said. "Last night you walked into my room, and—" He hesitated, not wanting to make things worse. "You called me David." Lila froze. No! She had mistaken Adrian for David? A sickening realization clawed its way into her chest. Not only had she betrayed the man she loved, but she had done it in a drunken haze, unable to even recognize who she was with. She couldn't bear it. Without another word, she scrambled to grab her clothes, her hands trembling so much that she couldn't even zip up her dress properly. She bolted toward the bathroom and slammed the door shut. Lila stood before the mirror, her hands gripping the edge of the sink, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She saw herself reflected in the glass, a broken version of herself, wide-eyed with shock, her skin pale and lifeless. What had she done? Had she just destroyed her entire life? Desperate, she turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto her face, but nothing could wash away the horror and regret clawing at every fiber of her being. She wanted to turn back time. She wanted to wake up and realize this was all just a nightmare. But the reality was, she was here. The reality was, she had spent the night with a stranger. Her first time had been given to someone she didn't even know. And in just a few days, she was supposed to be married. And the worst part, she couldn't change any of it. She had to get out of here. Lila bolted out of the hotel room as if she were being chased. Her heels clattered against the polished floor, each step frantic, chaotic. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might explode. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't. She couldn't face the man she had woken up beside. Couldn't meet those deep, unreadable eyes that held confusion, but also something else she refused to acknowledge. Adrian remained standing at the doorway, leaning against the frame, his gaze following her retreating figure as she disappeared down the hallway. But Lila didn't care. There was only one thought in her mind: she had to escape. She nearly tripped as she stumbled into her apartment, slamming the door shut behind her, her back pressed against the cold wooden surface, her fingers digging into it as if trying to ground herself. She felt like she was suffocating. Everything around her felt foreign. She dragged herself toward the mirror, and when she saw her own reflection, she froze. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her lips dry and cracked. She didn't even recognize herself anymore. Her once pristine white dress was now wrinkled, the faint scent of alcohol still clinging to her skin, and on her neck, subtle traces of pinkish marks, remnants of a night she couldn't even fully remember. Her hand trembled as she reached up, touching her reflection in the mirror. How had she let this happen? And then, like a tidal wave, fragments of last night came crashing into her mind. She had been drunk. She had walked into an unfamiliar room. She had called out for David, but the man who had answered her wasn't him. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palm, but the pain did nothing to bring her clarity. She had betrayed David. No, this couldn't be real. What was she supposed to do now? A voice whispered in her mind. No one knows, just forget it. Bury it forever. If you don't say anything, David will never find out. Yes, if she said nothing, if she pretended everything was normal, then maybe it would all just go away. The wedding would still happen. She would still become David's wife. She would still have the life she had always dreamed of. All she had to do was forget. But then, another voice, louder this time, darker and impossible to ignore. But can you forgive yourself? Her chest tightened. How could she hide this? How could she start a marriage with a lie this enormous hanging over her head? David loved her. He trusted her completely, and she had betrayed him. She squeezed her eyes shut as a single tear rolled down her cheek. She could keep this secret, but could she live with it? She couldn't live a lie. Even if it cost her everything, even if she lost David, she had to tell the truth. Lila took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed David's number. Her throat felt tight, her voice barely above a whisper. But she knew. This was something she had to do. David, I need to tell you something. Lila stepped into the cafe, her hands gripping the hem of her coat, her palms ice cold despite the warm weather. She had spent the entire night thinking, agonizing, fighting against herself. But in the end, she knew. She couldn't hide the truth. David was already there, waiting for her, his face lit up with happiness, his eyes gleaming with love the moment he saw her. He had no idea that within minutes, his entire world would come crashing down. Lila! He stood up, pulling out a chair for her. You're here. Should I order for you? Do you want a cappuccino or a latte? Lila didn't answer. She couldn't. David's smile faltered slightly as he noticed the unusual look in her eyes. What's wrong? You look tired. Lila bit her lip, trying to steady her breath, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. David. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something. His gaze softened, his smile fading as concern flickered in his eyes. What is it? He asked gently. Lila clenched her hands even tighter, her heart pounding violently, threatening to shatter inside her chest. And then, in just a few short minutes, she told him everything. David's entire world collapsed. He sat there in complete silence. The cafe seemed to fall into a suffocating stillness, the air thick with an unbearable weight. The only sound left was his ragged breathing. His face turned pale, his eyes vacant. She could see his jaw tighten, his fists clenching so hard that his knuckles went white. And then his voice came, low, quiet, but chilling. You're joking, right? Lila shook her head as tears spilled down her cheeks. I wish this was just a nightmare, David, she whispered, her voice breaking. But it's the truth. I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't even remember how it happened. Enough! David's palms slammed against the table, the sound like thunder in the quiet cafe, making Lila flinch. A few customers turned to look, but David didn't care. The pain was too much to contain. He stared at her, his eyes no longer filled with warmth, but with betrayal. You cheated on me right before our wedding, he said, his voice thick with anger and heartbreak. And you expect me to forgive you just because you didn't mean to? His voice trembled, heavy with fury, pain, and disbelief. Lila lowered her head, her tears dripping onto the table. David, I love you. Don't say that. He leaned back, as if trying to breathe, as if the weight of her words was suffocating him, and when he looked at her again, his gaze was different. Gone was the man who loved her. In his place was someone who had lost all faith in her. Everything we had, everything we built, meant nothing to you? His voice was hoarse, nearly a whisper. Lila shook her head frantically. No, it's not like that. I never wanted this. I don't even remember what happened. David let out a bitter laugh, a hollow, lifeless sound that cut through her like a blade. But it did happen, Lila, and that's all that matters. Lila reached for his hand, desperation in her eyes. David, please don't do this. But he only stared at her, as if the woman in front of him was no longer the same person he had once loved. This is over. David stood up. There was nothing more to say. There was nothing left to save. He looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with devastation, disappointment, and a pain so deep that it stole away any words she could have said. And then he walked away. Lila remained frozen in place, her heart shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. In just one night, she had lost everything. The man she loved, the wedding she had dreamed of, the future she had imagined. All that was left was a mess she could never undo. Jessica stood before the mirror, the corners of her lips curling into a satisfied smile. The wedding was off. She had just received the news from a mutual friend. David and Lila had broken up. She could vividly imagine Lila's devastated expression, the agony of losing the man she loved the most. Finally, justice had been served, Jessica thought. On the outside, she played the role of a concerned friend, pretending to sympathize with Lila's misfortune. But deep inside, she was basking in triumph. With Lila out of the picture, David would come back to her. The moment she heard the news, Jessica wasted no time in seeking out David. She knew he was in pain, and this was the perfect moment to step in, to be the comforting presence he needed. She found him at a bar near his office, sitting alone with a glass of whiskey, staring blankly into the amber liquid. Jessica carefully approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice dripping with concern. David, I'm so sorry to hear about this. David didn't react immediately. She continued, her tone soft and soothing. I know this must be so hard for you. Lila, she never deserved your love. David took a slow sip of his drink, still silent. But what Jessica failed to realize was that his silence wasn't from heartbreak, it was from rage. She didn't know that her perfect plan had been exposed. A mutual friend had overheard her conversation with a hotel staff member, the very person she had secretly paid to keep quiet about what had really happened. The truth had spread quickly, and finally David knew everything. When he looked up at her, his expression had changed completely. There was no sadness, no heartbreak, only fury. You did all of this? His voice was low and strained, each word laced with barely contained rage. Jessica froze. She stammered, David, I don't understand what you're talking about. Drop the act. David's tone was razor sharp. I know everything. You set this all up. You got Lila drunk. You led her to that hotel. You destroyed everything. Jessica's face went pale. This wasn't possible. She had planned everything meticulously. How had it all unraveled? Desperately, she tried to salvage the situation. David, I was only trying to protect you. Lila didn't deserve you. Shut up. It was the first time David had ever raised his voice at her. You love me so much that you ruined Lila's life for it. His voice was filled with nothing but disgust. Jessica stood frozen, speechless. His words cut through her like a knife. For so long she had convinced herself that she loved David, that everything she did was for him. But now, looking into his eyes, filled with nothing but hatred and contempt, she realized the truth. She had never truly loved him. She had only wanted to possess him. "David, I—" Her voice was barely a whisper. David shook his head. "I never want to see you again. We're done." No anger, no lingering emotions, just an ending. Jessica stood there, motionless, watching as David turned and walked away. For the first time, she truly felt the weight of loss. Leila had lost everything, but in the end, Jessica was the one who had lost the most. This time, there was no way to fix it, no way to take it back. She had destroyed everything with her own hands, and now all she had left was herself. Leila quietly pulled her suitcase out of the small apartment she had once filled with countless memories of David. Her breath was heavy, but her eyes were dry. She had cried enough. Everything in this city reminded her of the past. The little cafe on the corner where they spent hours talking about nothing and everything. The park in the crisp autumn afternoons where David would hold her hand and talk about the future. This apartment, once filled with laughter and promises, but now all of it was nothing more than the remnants of a shattered dream. She couldn't stay here anymore. Leila pulled her suitcase through the doorway without looking back. New York welcomed her with the sharp chill of early autumn, the bustling streets, and towering skyscrapers that stood like pillars of endless opportunity. This was where she would rebuild herself. She rented a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, not luxurious, not as comfortable as before, but enough. Enough to have her own space, to reflect, to piece herself back together. Her days began in front of the computer, scrolling through job listings, sending out applications to every company she thought she had a chance with. Mornings started with bitter coffee. Nights ended with the dim glow of her laptop screen. She had no time to dwell on sadness, no time to reminisce about the past. The only option was to move forward. Weeks passed. Rejections flooded her inbox. Anxiety gnawed at her confidence. Could she really start over? Was she strong enough to make it? But then, on a cold morning, a different email appeared. "Congratulations! You have been selected for the position of project assistant at Ellington Corporation." For a moment, her heart stopped. She did it. Ellington Corporation, one of the most prestigious technology firms, a dream for so many. And now she was about to be part of it. The towering Ellington building loomed in front of her, its sleek glass panels reflecting the golden hues of the rising sun, swallowing the vast sky of New York. Leila stood at the entrance, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Today was the start of something new. Adjusting her crisp white blouse and smoothing down her black pencil skirt, she stepped forward. Her pulse quickened, a mix of nerves and excitement thrumming through her veins. Inside, men and women in tailored suits moved with purpose, their conversations brisk and professional. The atmosphere was overwhelming, yet electrifying. She followed the instructions she had received, stepping into the elevator and pressing the button for the top floor, the executive level, where the orientation meeting for new hires would take place. She had no idea that her past was waiting for her at the end of this elevator ride. The doors slid open and Leila stepped into the conference room. Then she froze. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Sitting at the head of the table, exuding an aura of cold authority, was Adrian. No, this couldn't be real. What was he doing here? But nothing was wrong. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a mistake. Adrian was the CEO of Ellington Corporation. Leila felt the air leave her lungs. She couldn't breathe. Leila felt the world around her fade into a muted blur. The other employees were engaged in casual conversation, shuffling papers, exchanging introductions. But she could only register him. Adrian had seen her too. For a brief moment, surprise flickered across his features, but just as quickly, he masked it, regaining his composed, unreadable expression. A polite, professional smile curved his lips, but his eyes were anything but indifferent. Lila swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe past the erratic pounding in her chest. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't just turn and leave. Couldn't pretend she hadn't seen him. She had to sit down. She had to act normal. She had to pretend that nothing had ever happened between them, as if she hadn't woken up beside him that morning. The meeting went on as usual, for everyone but Lila. Adrian spoke about the company's vision, about the upcoming business strategies, but his words barely registered in her mind. She was hyper-aware of every fleeting glance he threw her way, every subtle shift in his tone when his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. And the worst part? She had no idea what he was thinking. Was he amused? Annoyed? Did he find this situation ridiculous? Did he even care? One thing was certain. She didn't want to find out. But fate had other plans. As the meeting wrapped up, employees slowly filed out, leaving only a few lingering to gather their notes. And then, his voice cut through the air. Lila! She froze and her grip tightened around her folder. She couldn't pretend she hadn't heard him. Slowly she turned, forcing her voice to remain steady. Hello, Adrian. He leaned slightly against the table, his gaze sharp yet laced with something unreadable. I didn't expect to see you here. Neither did she. She swallowed hard. If my presence is an issue, There's no need. He cut her off smoothly, his tone level but unreadable. A faint, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. I think this is an interesting coincidence. For him, maybe. For Lila, it was anything but. In the days that followed, Lila did everything in her power to avoid Adrian. She minimized her presence in meetings where he was present. If she wasn't required to speak, she stayed in the background, keeping her head down, hoping to blend into the sea of employees. If she saw him approaching the elevator, she would wait for the next one, willing to be late just to avoid being trapped in a confined space with him. She declined lunch invitations from colleagues who were close to Adrian, even if it made her seem distant or antisocial. She built walls, deliberate, invisible, impenetrable. But Adrian wasn't the type of man to ignore something when he felt a connection. And Lila was about to learn that running from him would only make him chase her harder. Adrian had noticed it. He knew she was avoiding him, and that only made him more intrigued. At first, Adrian thought their encounter was just a strange coincidence, an unfortunate incident, a night lost in the chaos that perhaps both of them wanted to forget. But the more he watched her, the more he realized that Lila was unlike any woman he had ever met. She was intelligent, hardworking, resilient. She wasn't like the women who usually approached him, the ones who cared only for his status, his wealth. Lila didn't need him, and perhaps that was what made him want to get closer to her. One late evening, with the office lights dimming as most of the staff filtered out for the night, Lila was still at her desk, her eyes glued to the screen, focused on finishing her report before leaving. She didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching from behind. Then came a low voice, smooth but commanding. Can we talk for a few minutes? Lila froze. She turned, her eyes locking onto Adrian, standing at the door, his calm yet powerful presence filling the room. She couldn't run now. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen him. She had to stay. She had to keep her composure, as if nothing had ever happened, as if she hadn't woken up beside him that morning. The meeting continued as usual, for everyone except Lila. Adrian spoke about the company's vision, the upcoming plans, but Lila couldn't focus. Each time he glanced at her, it felt like being caught in a vortex, a swirling confusion she couldn't escape. She didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't know if he saw it all as a joke or an ironic twist of fate. But one thing she knew for sure, she didn't want to face him, but fate wouldn't let her escape. When the meeting ended and most of the employees began filing out, a few stayed behind to finish up their notes. And then, his voice came again. Lila. She paused. Her grip tightened on the folder in her hands. She couldn't pretend she hadn't heard him. Slowly she turned, trying to keep her voice steady. Hello, Adrian. He leaned slightly against the table, his eyes fixed on her with a piercing yet slightly amused gaze. I didn't think I'd see you here. Neither did she. She swallowed hard. If my presence is an issue, I can... There's no need. He cut her off, his tone calm yet unyielding. A faint, knowing smirk appeared on his lips. I think this is an interesting coincidence. For him, maybe. For Lila, it was anything but. In the days that followed, Lila tried to avoid Adrian at all costs. She limited her presence in meetings that included him. When she wasn't required to speak, she would stay in the background, hoping to remain unnoticed. If she saw him approaching the elevator, she would wait for the next one, willing to be late just to avoid being trapped in a confined space with him. She turned down lunch invitations from his close colleagues, even though she knew it might raise suspicion. She kept her distance, erecting invisible walls between them. But Adrian was different. He wasn't the type to let things go when he felt a connection, and Lila was about to learn that Adrian's persistence was relentless. He didn't force the issue, but he didn't let her completely slip away either. He invited her to important meetings, gave her challenging projects that kept her involved. He created opportunities for them to talk privately, making it seem casual, but Lila knew better. Everything he did had an underlying purpose. She tried to keep her distance, but Adrian's patience was both unnerving and formidable. Gradually, she began to see another side of Adrian. He wasn't just a cold, powerful CEO like she had initially assumed. He had depth. He was tough on work, but it wasn't out of arrogance or selfishness. He genuinely cared about the growth of each employee, especially her. He didn't offer praise easily, but when he did, it carried weight. It made her feel challenged, driven, rather than manipulated. He listened when she spoke. He noticed the little things, the signs when she was tired or when she was hiding something. She began to realize that he wasn't just interested in her for a passing amusement, but that in itself terrified her. Because the more she saw of Adrian, the more she realized how difficult it would be to run away from him. Lila was terrified that if she allowed herself to feel anything for Adrian, the painful past would repeat itself. Terrified that if she opened her heart, she would lose everything once again. Terrified that, once more, she would hurt herself. She wasn't ready to love anyone. She had convinced herself that she was strong enough to stand on her own, that she no longer needed anyone else to enter her life. But then Adrian appeared, with his patient gaze, with his concern, subtle but never absent, with his words that made her pause, made her question herself. I won't let you keep running away. No matter how hard she tried, fate didn't give her the choice, because Adrian's feelings for her were growing stronger by the day. And she knew if this continued, she wouldn't be able to stop herself from falling any further. Lila sat motionless on the bed, her trembling hand clutching the ultrasound result. Inside, her heart was a storm, emotions crashing against each other in a chaos she couldn't control. She was pregnant. She had seen the tiny form on the ultrasound screen earlier that day, a small, faint shape, but undeniably a life growing inside of her. She gently placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the shift in her body, something she had never imagined before. A new life was beginning, a child of hers, and Adrian's. The rising fear. She didn't know what to do. The fear swelled inside her, pulling her into a vortex with no escape. This wasn't a small matter. This wasn't just a shock. This was a life-altering event. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be ready. Lila shut her eyes and the memories of the past rushed back, like a nightmare. She remembered that fateful night. The moment she walked into Adrian's room called out a different name. The warmth of him, the tenderness and confusion in his eyes. The moment she lost everything. There was only one man who could be the father of this child. Adrian. She looked down at her hand, where David's engagement ring had once been. Though it had been removed long ago, the mark of the past still etched deeply in her heart. She had lost him. She had lost the future they had once built together. Now she was about to be a mother, but to a child with a different man. She didn't know how Adrian would react if he knew the truth. Would he feel obligated, or would he truly want to be a part of her child's life? She couldn't know. She didn't want to take that risk, because if he stayed out of duty, it would be worse than if he left. She couldn't let Adrian feel bound by responsibility alone. Layla's breath shook as she stared at the ultrasound result. Part of her wanted to tell the truth. Another part wanted to bury it forever. She couldn't let Adrian know. She decided to keep the secret. No matter what happened, this would be her child, only hers. In the weeks that followed, Lila tried to keep her life as normal as possible. She worked, she avoided Adrian as much as possible. She quietly went to her doctor's appointments alone, concealing her pregnancy with loose clothing. But her body couldn't keep the secret forever. Adrian noticed something was off with Lila. She wasn't as energetic as before. She seemed distracted in meetings, and it looked like she was trying to avoid him. He began watching her more closely. And then one day, the truth came out. Late one night, the Ellington office was nearly empty. Most of the employees had gone home long ago, leaving only the dim light from Lila's desk. She sat at her computer, eyes focused on the numbers, trying to finish her final report for the day. A slight pain in her stomach made her wince. She instinctively placed a hand on her abdomen, a habit she couldn't control. She had started to feel the baby's presence, but she couldn't let her emotions get in the way of her work. Sighing, she stood and left her desk, heading outside to get some water. On her desk, her purse was slightly open, and inside, a stack of her pregnancy documents peeked out. Adrian stepped into the office. He had come to discuss an important project, but Lila's office was empty. He furrowed his brow, about to turn around, but his eyes accidentally flicked over to a piece of paper lying on the desk. A small stack of documents, but the printed words on it made him freeze. Pregnancy record. Patient's name, Lila Anderson. Adrian's heart felt like it was being crushed in an instant. He reached out and grabbed the ultrasound paper. The date, the gestational age. He stared at the numbers. Numbers that told him an undeniable truth. This child was his. The world seemed to freeze in that moment. A rush of questions flooded his mind, each one a piercing blade cutting through his chest. Why hadn't she said anything? How long was she planning on hiding this from him? His grip tightened on the paper, his eyes darkening. He placed the file back on the desk, took a deep breath, and tried to steady himself. Just then, the door opened. Lila stepped in, holding a glass of water, but when she saw the serious look on Adrian's face, she froze. She immediately knew. The file had been turned over. The ultrasound paper was right there, exposing the secret she had been trying so hard to keep hidden. Her heart seemed to stop. Adrian didn't need to ask. He already knew. Lila took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Adrian, I can explain. But Adrian didn't give her a chance to come up with an excuse. His voice dropped, thick with danger. How long were you going to keep this from me? Lila stiffened. She could see the disappointment in his eyes. Not just anger, but hurt. He felt betrayed. She opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotions rising within him. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was lower now, but still sharp. Did you plan to keep this secret forever? Lila clenched her hands, guilt rising up inside her. I didn't want you to feel obligated. She spoke softly, avoiding his gaze. I didn't want you to stay with me out of duty. Adrian laughed, a hollow laugh, but one that carried a storm of emotions beneath it. You think I'm the type of person who would do that? Lila fell silent. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know if she could trust him anymore. Adrian watched her for a long time, his eyes filled with emotions she couldn't decipher. Then slowly he spoke again, each word clear, more resolute than ever. Lila, this isn't just your problem. This is our child. You don't get to make decisions for both of us. Lila's heart pounded erratically. She had prepared herself for Adrian's anger. She had prepared herself for him to refuse responsibility. But she never expected he would actually want to stay with her. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she could let him into her life. She didn't know if, once again, opening her heart would mean losing everything. Adrian didn't force her to answer immediately, but he didn't leave. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. The room grew silent, the only sound being the soft glow of the desk lamp and Lila's labored breathing. Adrian stood before her, his gaze never leaving her uncertain eyes. The pregnancy file was still there, revealing the truth she had desperately tried to hide. There was no way to run now. Lila took a deep breath, feeling her defenses crumble, piece by piece. She was exhausted from keeping everything locked inside, exhausted from the old pain that still clung to her. She didn't know why, but in that moment, with Adrian's unwavering gaze upon her, she wanted to say everything. She stepped back, leaning against the desk, her eyes drifting to the floor. "Do you know?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of deep sorrow. "I was about to get married." Adrian wasn't surprised. He had already suspected, but he wanted to hear it from her. She continued, each word slicing into her heart. "David was the man I loved with all my heart. I thought with him I'd have everything." She let out a bitter laugh. "But I destroyed it all." Adrian frowned slightly, hating the way she was blaming herself. He knew something was off in her story. "Why do you say that?" His voice was low but sharp, the question carrying the weight of his growing concern. Lila looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain that had never faded. "Because I betrayed him." Adrian's fist clenched, but he didn't interrupt her. "The night before the wedding, I was with another man." She bit her lip, still unable to fully accept the truth. "Even though I didn't mean to, it happened, and he couldn't forgive me." The room fell silent. Adrian's chest tightened. Not because of that night, not because of how they met, but because she had to carry this burden alone. She had lived with that guilt, drowning in it, too afraid to open her heart again. Adrian took a step closer, closing the gap between them. He placed his hand on the desk, looking at her for what felt like an eternity. "Lila." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't care about your past." She flinched. He continued, his voice steady, almost like a promise. "I care about you." Lila felt her heart skip a beat. Adrian's gaze was unwavering, unflinching. "I like you, Lila." The words pierced through every wall she had carefully built around herself. She had prepared herself for his anger, his reproach, for a fight. But not this. She wasn't ready for such an unshakable sincerity. Lila bit her lip, turning away, trying to avoid his unwavering gaze. "You're not responsible for me just because of the baby." Adrian let out a low, frustrated laugh. He gently but firmly raised her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Do you really think this is just about responsibility?" Lila's heart raced. She wanted to escape. She wanted to push all the feelings away, to turn her back like she had done for so long. But this time, Adrian wouldn't let her. He looked at her, his gaze a mix of anger, hurt, and above all, something much deeper. "I don't like you just because you're carrying my child." He tilted his head, his voice softening, as if he were confessing his deepest truth. "I like you because you're you." Lila could hardly breathe. It felt like the world was spinning around her. She wasn't ready for this, but her heart was betraying her logic. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she could accept him. But one thing she knew for sure, Adrian wouldn't leave. He wouldn't let her keep running away, and this time she had to face her true feelings. New York on a gentle, rainy afternoon. Lila had just stepped out of the office after a long day. Her mind still spun with the conversation she had with Adrian. His words echoed in her mind. "I don't like you just because you're carrying my child. I like you because you're you." She didn't know what to do. She had thought the hardest part would be facing Adrian and the baby growing inside her. But fate didn't give her time to think. A familiar voice broke through the quiet hum of the city. "Lila?" She froze. Her heart stopped. Slowly turning around, she saw David standing there. David still looked the same, but something had changed. His face was a little more gaunt, his eyes carrying exhaustion and regret. He stood there looking at her, as if he had traveled miles just to reclaim what he had lost. A cold breeze brushed past her, but Lila no longer felt it. "David," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. David took a step toward her. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low but filled with deep pain. "I didn't trust you, and I lost you." Lila felt her throat tighten. Each of his words was like a knife cutting into old wounds, pulling her back to a time when she loved him with all her heart, when she believed they had a future together. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She had changed. Everything had changed. Lila swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. David, I... She couldn't keep this from him. She couldn't keep him in the dark any longer. Taking a deep breath, she looked him in the eye. I'm pregnant. Her words dropped into the air between them like a bomb. David froze. He stared at her, as if trying to understand whether he had heard wrong. Lila saw the pain flash in his eyes. Only for a moment, but she saw it. The pain of a man who had lost the woman he once loved. David took a deep breath. With Adrian? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. Lila nodded quietly. Silence stretched between them. David looked down, as if trying to control a storm raging inside him. But when he looked up again, his eyes were more determined than ever. I still love you, Lila. Lila froze. I can accept the child as my own, if you give me a chance. The world seemed to stop in that moment. Lila felt as though she was being pulled in two different directions. She looked at David. He was her first love, the person she once thought she would spend her entire life with, the one she believed would be her final destination. She had loved him with all her heart, with everything she had. But then, she looked down at her stomach. She thought of Adrian, the man who had entered her life in the most unexpected way, yet was becoming a part of it she could no longer imagine without. He wasn't the man she had once loved, but he was the one who hadn't turned his back on her. Lila didn't know who she truly loved. She didn't know if she could go back to the past or if she should move forward into the future. She didn't know what her heart was telling her, but she knew. No matter who she chose, she wouldn't be able to hurt the other without feeling her own heart break. She didn't want to make a choice, but in the end, she knew she would have to. It didn't take Adrian long to find out. David had returned. The gossip spread quickly through the office, the curious glances, the small conversations between colleagues. It wasn't hard for Adrian to piece everything together. David, the first love of Lila's, the one she had once wanted to spend her life with, the one she had cried for losing, and now he was back, just as Lila was facing the biggest decision of her life. Adrian knew what that meant, but it didn't make him step back. Lila sat alone in the cafe, gently stirring her cup of tea, but not really drinking. She was thinking about everything. About David, about Adrian, about a future she didn't know where it was heading. She sensed Adrian's presence the moment he entered the cafe. She didn't even need to look up to know he was near. When he sat down opposite her, she felt her heart tighten. There was no anger, no accusations, only deep understanding in his gaze. I heard David has returned, Adrian said, his voice calm, but there was something deeper behind it. Lila nodded slightly. She didn't need to hide anymore. She knew Adrian would know. He didn't look away from her, his gaze steady but unable to conceal his sincerity. I don't want to pressure you, Lila. She looked up at him. I respect your decision. His voice was warm, confident, as if he had thought long and hard before saying this. Lila's heart raced, her thoughts spinning. Adrian didn't pressure her to choose immediately. He didn't force her to answer, but he wasn't going to step back. But I still want you by my side. Lila swallowed hard. His words were simple, but they shook her to the core. Adrian didn't say, choose me. He didn't say, forget David. He simply said he wanted her, sincerely, with no pressure, no conditions. I've always been waiting for you. The words echoed in the quiet of the cafe, making Lila's heart beat erratically, uncontrollably. She looked at Adrian. He wasn't the man of her past. He wasn't the old dream she once chased, but he was the one who was always here, always ready to wait for her. And for the first time, she truly felt confused by her own emotions. She didn't know if she could love Adrian, but she knew he wasn't asking her to choose right now. And she also knew he wouldn't leave. Not ever. Lila sat on the bench in the park, her eyes fixed on the trees swaying gently in the breeze. In the past few days, she had thought deeply about everything. She knew she couldn't delay this decision any longer. David sat beside her, waiting silently for the answer he had been longing for. He had given her time, space to think, but deep down he knew that if she needed time to think about their love, then perhaps that love was no longer the same. Lila, I love you, David said, his gaze sincere. I know things have changed, but I'm willing to do anything to make us be together again. I don't care whose child you're carrying. I just need you." Leela took a deep breath, turning to look at him. She knew that what she was about to say would hurt David, but she couldn't deceive herself anymore. "David, I can't go back to you." A flicker of pain passed through David's eyes, but he kept his composure. "Is it because of Adrian?" Lila shook her head. "No, this has nothing to do with him. We can't go back to what we had just because of the past. I've hurt you, and I've changed. I'm no longer the girl who was once engaged to you." David looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps he had known the answer already, but he still hoped for a miracle. "I understand," he said finally, his voice light as a breeze. "As long as you're happy, I won't hold on anymore." Lila clenched her hands tightly in her lap. "Thank you for loving me, for being such an important part of my life. But now, I need to move on." David forced a smile, but his eyes spoke everything. "Then, goodbye, Lila." He stood up slowly, leaving without a word, and for the first time, Lila didn't run after him to hold on. She had chosen her own path. Adrian stood at the door of Lila's apartment, his hands tucked into his pockets, his face showing a trace of concern. He knew she had met with David. He wasn't sure who she would choose, but no matter what, he still wanted her to be happy. The door opened. Lila saw him, a hint of exhaustion in her eyes, but no longer the confusion she had once carried. "Can I come in?" Adrian asked. She nodded quietly, stepping aside to let him in. The atmosphere in the room was still for a moment until Adrian decided to speak. "I don't know what you've decided, but no matter what the outcome is, I still want to be there for you and the baby. Not because of responsibility, but because I truly want to." Lila looked up at him. Adrian continued, "I know we didn't start in the perfect way, but I believe that love doesn't always come from perfection. It can be built day by day, moment by moment. If you give me a chance, I'll show you that I'm not just the father of this baby, but I can be someone you can rely on." Lila felt a warm wave of emotion stir in her heart. Adrian had always been there. He didn't push her. He didn't force her to choose. He just waited, patiently, sincerely, and with affection. "You turned down David," she whispered. Adrian was momentarily surprised, but then he nodded slowly, waiting for her to continue. "I don't know if I can love anyone again. I've lost faith in love," she sighed. "But if I can try again, I want to try with you." A smile slowly spread across Adrian's face. He gently took her hand, squeezing it softly. "I'll wait, no matter how long." Time passed and Adrian was never in a rush. He stood by Lila when she needed him, but never forced her to respond to his feelings immediately. He took her to her doctor's appointments, patiently listening to the doctor explain every detail. He helped her clean the house, went shopping for baby clothes with her. He didn't just do it as a responsible father. He did it as a man who truly cared for the woman he loved. Gradually, Lila felt the resistance in her heart begin to fade. Adrian wasn't David, and she wasn't the girl she used to be. They had started from a mistake, but love didn't always come from perfection. What mattered was that they had chosen to rebuild instead of giving up. One late evening, after Adrian drove her home from a checkup, Leela instinctively grabbed his hand. Adrian looked at her, his eyes filled with hope. "I think I'm ready to love you," she whispered. Adrian smiled, leaned down, and gently kissed her forehead. "I knew," he whispered. "I've just been waiting for you to realize it." And for the first time after everything they had been through, Lila felt her heart finally at peace. She had made her choice, and it was the best decision of her life. 3 years later, Lila was busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner when Adrian entered. He leaned against the doorframe, quietly watching her. She was still the woman he had fallen in love with from the very first moment, but now she was also the mother of his daughter, his partner, his anchor, the one person he never wanted to lose. "Do you know how long I've been standing here?" Lila suddenly asked without turning around. Adrian laughed and walked over, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was just thinking, how did I get so lucky?" Lila smiled softly and tilted her head to rest against him. "I don't know either. Maybe it's fate." He kissed the top of her head. Then, What do you think fate has to say about you marrying me? Lila froze. She turned to face him, her eyes wide in shock. And in that moment, he knelt down. A small velvet box appeared in his hand, and when he opened it, a sparkling diamond ring lay inside. Lila! Adrian looked at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. We've been through so much together. You're not only the mother of my daughter, but you're also the one person I want to spend my whole life with. You may not have been sure about love at first, but I want you to know I've been sure about you from the very first moment. So, will you marry me? Lila felt her heart stop for a second. She had imagined this moment before, wondering how she would react if Adrian ever proposed, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming emotions that flooded her in that instant. She knelt down with him, tears streaming down her face. Adrian, I don't need a ring to know I want to be with you for the rest of my life, she choked out. But I want this moment to say that I agree. Adrian laughed, a light and happy sound. He gently slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a deep kiss. Their daughter Mia was sitting in her crib nearby, laughing joyfully as if blessing her parents' union. Their wedding took place in a small, cozy garden filled with warmth and fresh flowers. It wasn't the extravagant wedding Lila had once dreamed of, but it was the perfect wedding she could have ever imagined. She walked down the aisle in a pristine white wedding dress, her eyes welling up with tears as she saw Adrian waiting for her at the end of the path. When she reached him, Adrian took her hand firmly, as if to convey a silent promise without words. They exchanged vows under the soft sunlight in front of their loved ones. David was there too. He was no longer the broken man from years ago, but someone who had truly let go of the past and found his own path. When Lila saw him, he smiled and nodded. In the end, everyone found their own happiness. As Adrian leaned down to kiss Lila amidst the cheers of everyone, she knew that she had truly completed her journey. Life wasn't always perfect. Lila had made mistakes. She had lost, and she had once stood at a crossroads not knowing which path to take. But she had learned that true love doesn't always start perfectly. Sometimes it stems from imperfections, from mistakes. What matters is whether both people are willing to work through them together. Happiness isn't about avoiding hardships. It's about knowing how to move forward after the falls. Forgiveness isn't only for others, it's also for yourself. In the end, love isn't about who comes first or last, it's about who stays. Adrian had stayed. He was her final choice, but also the best choice she had ever made. She was no longer the girl who feared love. Now she was the woman who had found her own happiness. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.